Hello everyone, and welcome to this bonus video on expression maps. By the end of this video, you'll know how to create your own expression maps from scratch, import existing ones, and utilize them effectively to dramatically increase your workflow. As stated in part 1 of this series, expression maps are effectively a series of triggers, which streamline how articulations are selected during playback. And in my experience, they are far faster and more efficient than MIDI note key switches. Reason being is because MIDI note key switches tend to take your eyes and attention off of the music. This can interrupt your creative flow, as well as force you to memorize or constantly reference a note map to properly trigger the articulations that you want. First, we'll cover how to create an expression map from scratch. Go to your inspector in Cubase and ensure that the expression map drop-down option is visible. If not, right-click on the inspector and select Setup Sections to activate it. Once visible, click the drop-down arrow and click the expression map button to open the setup window. Here, click the big plus symbol in the middle and create your first blank expression map. Name it after the first instrument in your track list and click OK. Before we start adding real articulations, we're going to create a blank default slot. Click the Add Sound Slot button, click the plus symbol, name it Default, click Add Articulation, and click OK. You'll also want to remove the trigger note so that it's also blank. Creating a blank default like this prevents the expression map from automatically assigning an active articulation from your player to all newly created notes. And this has a nifty benefit we'll talk about a little bit later. Let's create our first real articulation trigger. Click the plus button to add a new sound slot and type in the name of the articulation. Sustain is not a standard performance articulation, so I'll click the plus button and type in sustain. I'll set the display as text, set the type to attribute, and click OK. Now, I can either click OK again or double-click the new sustain articulation we created to load that key switch as the control for the sustain articulation. To ensure the articulation triggers appropriately, we'll set the trigger and output map to C0 to match the key switch assignment found in Opus. And that's pretty much all there is to it. Now we can proceed with the rest of the articulations. For this tutorial, I'll be using the same 4 long articulations I used in part 1 when we learned how to set up our instrument tracks. These include sustain, legato, and the half and whole tone trills. I'll click the plus symbol to add a new sound slot, type legato into the search box, as this is a standard performance articulation. I can then double-click and boom, there it is. A quick note, however, is that this one loads as a direction trigger, which you can see in the lower right corner. I want this to be an attribute trigger, which I can change by double-clicking that icon. Next, I change the trigger and output map to D0, matching the articulation key switch note in Opus, and that's it. Now, I'll do the same for the half and whole tone trills, like so. And there we have it. My piccolo flute long articulations are mapped, and I can now assign this expression map to my piccolo flute instrument track. Let's create a simple melody and change the articulations in the piano roll to test our expression map. With my melody now in place, I can highlight which notes I want to change and select the desired articulation from this drop-down menu here. I'll set the first 2 notes to sustain, the second 2 notes to legato, and the 4th and 5th notes to half and whole tone trills respectively. Take a listen. Once the expression map is set, switching articulations is as simple as highlight and click. Now, before we move on to importing pre-existing expression maps, I'd like to take note of some important details which you should be aware of. Currently, there is no industry standard for MIDI octave naming conventions. So, some VST makers will assign different octaves to what's known as note 0, which is where articulations are typically placed in order to be out of the way of the lowest notes of bass instruments, which can sometimes reach as low as C0 or even lower, such as the contrabassoon, contrabass, and other similar low-end instruments. Sometimes, as is the case with East-West, They'll assign note 0 as C0 and opt to place the articulation key switch notes to an octave that lies above the highest possible note of the instrument's natural range. An example would be the contrabassoon, which, as you can see here, starts its key switch assignments on C3, as the instrument's highest possible note is the nearest E2 below it. Other VST makers will opt to assign note 0 as the note C-2, a full 2 octaves below C0. A good example would be Spitfire Audio. If you're using a Spitfire library in Kontakt, for instance, such as the Spitfire Symphony Orchestra, you can see the key switch assignments set to C-2 here, and they're displayed in red on the keyboard at the bottom of the Kontakt player. If you change the key switch assignment, those red keys will move accordingly, like so. In the case of a VST maker using C-2 as the key switch assignment zone, you'll want to adjust the trigger and output map to the appropriate notes. If you can't see exactly which notes trigger which articulation, click on one of those red keys in Kontakt, and the articulation above should change accordingly. Of course, you don't have to go through this headache and create these expression maps yourself. I, for one, am incredibly lazy when I know I can get away with it. And if all this work could be done for me ahead of time so I can just assign an expression map and presto, things work, I'm gonna do it. And thanks to both the online community and creators like Babylon Waves, this is 100% possible. If you're okay spending a bit of money, I highly recommend purchasing Art Conductor from Babylon Waves. For anyone who might be concerned, I am in no way sponsored, endorsed, or compensated by Babylon Waves for this recommendation. I've used Art Conductor for several years now and have been very impressed and pleased with how it's improved my workflow. So, I feel very confident recommending it to anyone and everyone who's willing to consider it. Regardless of whether you're using Art Conductor or other community-provided expression maps, the process which follows is going to be the same. To load an expression map, click this icon here in the setup window and navigate to wherever your stored expression map folder is. Select the expression map you want to add and click Open. Depending on who supplied the expression map, the attribute and direction trigger assignments might be different, and you can check them here in the lower right corner of the setup window. A note icon indicates an attribute, and a line with an arrow indicates a direction. The difference between attribute and direction triggers is that an attribute command is note-specific, whereas a direction trigger is more like a latch and will continue to play that articulation until a new trigger is assigned. Depending on your workflow preferences and how you interpret visual information, you may find one, the other, or both in combination to work best for you. I personally prefer to use only attribute commands, as I find it faster and more intuitive to simply highlight the notes I want and select an articulation from the drop-down menu right in the piano roll. If I use an expression map with direction triggers, I have to open the articulation option here, open these drop-downs, and click inside this grid area to activate the direction. And because of how compact this window is, I have to expand it greatly to even be able to read all that tiny text without straining my eyes. I mentioned before that using a blank default articulation had a nifty benefit, and here it is. With the default set to blank, articulation triggers behave exactly the same as direction triggers. You assign a single note at the beginning of a particular phrase or passage with a given articulation, and the articulation will continue playing until you highlight a new note further down the line and assign it with a different articulation. This, again, in my personal opinion, is much faster and more intuitive to my workflow than having to go through these extra drop-down menus and clicking inside of a grid to select which articulation I want. Another note for community-created or Art Conductor expression maps is to read any and all documentation that comes with it. For example, the Kontakt library expression maps provided by Art Conductor almost all require you to change the normal key switching option in the bottom right corner of Kontakt to the UACC KS and UI only option. If you do not adjust this setting in Kontakt, the expression maps will not work, and you may falsely think that this is actually a defective product and start complaining to the support team. I'm ashamed to say I did exactly that my first time out. If you've heard of the acronym RTFM, it very much applies here and will be important to ensure you're able to effectively take advantage of the benefits of these pre-existing expression maps provided by the community or makers like Babylon Waves. This brings us to the end of this video. I hope this gave you a better understanding and appreciation of the power of expression maps and their potential benefits to your workflow. Happy composing, and I will catch you later.